Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. My name is Jamie Coles and I'm the esports events manager for Clarion Gaming. We're going to be talking about the relationship between esports and the betting sector, especially around sporting integrity. Integrity is a key talking point within all sports, and perhaps even more so in esports as they continue to grow in prominence. Discussing the issue, we have two experts on the intersection between these sectors, Flavien and Marek. If you two would like to introduce yourselves, that'd be great.
And I'm the CEO at PandaScore. We're an esports data company. We've been working in the space for 6 years, and right now focusing quite a bit on working with sportsbook all across the globe on helping them with their esports offering.
Marek Suchar, head of partnerships and co-founder of Odin GG. We are B2B esports odds feed provider with our risk management solution and assurance solution as well. We are active on the market for both B2Bs and B2Cs, so we have multiple platform providers as a partners as well as bookmakers. With that being said, we've been around for more than 3 to 4 years, and we have established ourselves as probably the top choice for the regulated markets when it comes to esports.
So, to start off, esports has had some recent integrity-related scandals, such as the spectator bug in CSGO. Do you think the rise of betting has contributed to some of these integrity problems in esports?
Yeah, on this problem specifically, it is not relating to betting. It's more like cheating to improve performance, to win more, to have the coach involved in the game, whereas they are not supposed to be involved or to have this kind of information with the spectator bug. So specifically, not necessarily. You have a lot of examples where it's just about performance enhancements, the same way you will find in sports. But obviously, there is other topics where it's more betting related. We hear a lot of integrity concern on some minor leagues. For example, you can think about Dota 2 in Southeast Asia. There is quite a lot of concerns there. There is obviously topics linked to other matters. So match fixing is happening. It has been happened recently and in the past. On my perspective and what I see, it's not necessarily different and new, neither to esports or to sports, but there is definitely concerns. The last thing that we see right now is around more the general experience that has, and it's kind of counterintuitive. So basically right now when you're trying to bet as a fan, you're trying to bet on the stream, and the stream is delayed by a few minutes. So it's not necessarily integrity for the sportsbook, for the match or the tournament, but it's integrity for the punter and the bettor's perspective. And obviously the bookmakers, they have faster data than a few minutes. So basically the punter is trying to bet on something that most likely already happened, or the bookmaker is more aware of and has more data on. This is a problem that comes with the rise of betting in esports, and it's a problem that needs to be addressed. But there is definitely a balance. There is a lot of things that happen that are not really betting related, into cheating and so on. But there's also stuff that are coming from the betting problems.
Yeah, I would just add, esports is still evolving. It's a relatively new industry, so it has definitely its pain points. But at the same time, we don't see much of an issue of tier 1 tournaments. And just some of context. We provide 80 to 90% of our clients, they get risk management from us as well, which means that we are seeing the volume, the incoming bet slips, and we are able to identify match fixing and other things pretty much on the go many times and block those situations. And recently we've seen the situation when across multiple bookmakers, we've seen the similar behavior, the similar IPs, and we were able to identify the situation. But as Flavien pointed out, this is mostly related to tier 3 tournaments. We've seen some situation in tier 1 tournaments as well, but they were not that major. So I would say this is part of the growth of the ecosystem. Of course, it is good to have everybody who can actually help to actually help. So this can go across the tournament organizers and publishers, across the e-sig, across bookmakers, platform providers like us, to actually help and understand what is actually happening. And effectively, I think in the upcoming 2 to 3 years, we will see a lot of development in a way that the teams that are actually subject to this or the tournament that are subject to match fixing will eventually fall off because there will be no lines created for them. So eventually the sponsorships will not be there. So essentially, they will not get the revenue that they otherwise can generate on the sponsorship side of the business. And if you look at the ecosystem right now, betting and betting sponsors and bookmakers are one of the key sponsors of the esports teams. So if they are not willing to provide the lines on those teams or tournaments, they are definitely not willing to sponsor that kind of content. So essentially, these team players, they will not survive for long.
Are integrity issues in esports more common or more serious than traditional sports? Should we move on to Marek starting this time?
Yeah, as we outlined right already, this is a regular process with something that is relatively new, and esports is definitely new in this regard, even though it's been around for almost more than a decade. But esports betting is slightly younger. So I would say in essentially yes, because of this evolution. But at the same time, if you think about sports and esports athletes, we can put them in the same basket when it comes to the performance, how they are focusing on it. And as the industry grows, some of those issues will be resolved. At the same time, we have two contradictory trends in place. One is that esports is growing, and as it is growing, it gets more professionalized because more players, more tournaments are more professional. They actually do take care a lot about the integrity status, about all these kinds related to that. But at the same time, you have much more liquidity on the market. So there are more people interested in the tournaments, more people betting. So essentially, the more liquidity means also the higher motivation to match fix, right? And these trends would go against each other for quite some time going forward. But at the same time, I suspect what we've covered already, that when it comes to Tier 1 tournaments, this shouldn't be much of an issue going forward. It will be to some extent, for sure, but shouldn't be much of an issue because many of the players, they can face a live ban or if they are caught by doing something like that. But at the same time, the ecosystem will develop, so we potentially still can see some of this situation in Tier 2, Tier 3 tournaments, but this will eventually disappear as they move to the high rank as well.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to compare, and I think esports has learned also a lot from traditional sports. So basically, sports prepare the groundwork for esports integrity. And when you're looking at, for example, ESIC, which is working a lot on this matter with the stakeholders, the different stakeholders, they come from the sports industry. They learn from the sports industry. So that's, for me, that's the first big thing. And the second thing is probably esports is an environment that is easier to control than traditional sports. It's a virtual environment, like partially. So you can control the devices on offline competitions. You can control the keyboards, the mouse, you can control the computer. So a lot of ways to cheat are very, 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 very difficult. Whereas if you're looking at, for example, in cycling, there is way to cheat with the bikes because they're not checked 100% and they're not tracked 100%. So there is potentially a good case to make that esports might be a more controlled environment, and that definitely would benefit integrity as a whole. And yet the stakes are higher in sports for sure, and esports is going to get to there also progressively. So we've heard of so many scandals in sports, even in Tier 1 competitions like Tour de France in cycling, in tennis, the ATP, in the NCAA, also in the US, and so forth. There's so many examples of match fixing and betting with integrity concerns. In esports, there were, and as Marek said rightly, it's mainly on small tournaments, mainly on leagues that it's been years that we know those leagues are pretty much not to be offered because there is a lot of concerns there and it hasn't improved and so forth. So it's pretty, the way is pretty clear right now. We'll have some scandals in the future for sure. It will happen because, again, the stakes, when they begin high, it's going to be more interesting for bad people to try to corrupt the state of a match and so forth. But there is definitely learnings that we made, and everyone is really concerned about the topic. So it's a day-to-day conversation we are having with our customers, with other partners and other stakeholders in the space. So it's definitely a hot topic for everyone.
Yeah, on top of it, right? If you think about esports, and specifically during pandemic, although the tournaments were online, so to some extent you can have a control about the esports, but to some extent it is limited, especially for the online tournaments, because there's a huge difference between online and offline tournaments. In offline tournaments, you can control and limit a lot of stuff, but when it comes to online tournaments, there is very little that you can actually do around the tournaments. So there were the instances where where some zero delay streams were actually shared with the team, so they actually did know where the opponents are. So there are multiple things when it comes to online where esports can be controlled much more, but there is also a limitation how to actually do it feasible. And in addition to that, as correctly pointed out by Flavien, we are probably speaking about integrity more from the perspective of match fixing, because this is like betting related debate. But at the same time, there are also the things that are related to the performance of the players, that are related to devices that they could potentially use, the cheats within the game, or these kind of things. So they need to be taken into consideration as well. But this is usually more for the performance improvements. And of course, match fixing is a different beast in a sense. So there are multiple discussions that we should be having. And also one that ESIC addresses when it comes to the code of conduct, when it comes to anti-doping and other things. So when it comes to integrity, we will be mostly, I guess, speaking about the one particular topic, but at the same time, there are multiple topics that needs to be addressed when it comes to integrity of the esports as such.
And on what you mentioned regarding performance improvements, enhancement, it's a topic that is not spoken that much. I mean, it's not necessarily the topic of today, but it's something that needs to be more addressed by tournament organizers and so forth. There is too little checks on doping and things like this. Like the physical environment is controlled when you're offline again, but like anti-drug tests and so forth is not like a common practice across the board, and that should definitely change.
Thank you both for your input. Thank you very much for your input. So moving on, does betting take away from or add to the esports ecosystem? Let's start with Flavien.
For me, it's a net positive, and there is many positive things that happens from betting. But I think first we need to differentiate legal and regulated betting and illegal betting and unregulated betting. And the more regulated betting is, the better. Most regulation in the world, if not all regulation in the world, are having a positive, more positive impact and are protecting the consumer and so on and so forth, or at least to a certain gradient. So that's a net positive. And what we can see from it is like, first, it increases engagement. There is a lot of sports that high benefits and are still getting highly popular thanks to betting. If you're thinking, for example, horse racing, those are definitely a big, important piece for the future. Betting is about engagement of the fans. It creates more activity, creates more ways to interact with other fans, friends, and so on and so forth. It increases the stakes of a match and so on and so forth. So that's definitely a big one. The second one is, and I think Mike touched base on it a bit before, but more money in the space. The sponsoring coming from betting is huge. In sport, it's massive. In esports, it's getting there. It's already big. There's some games where it's not the case. For example, games linked to Riot Games, for example. But on the rest, you see a lot of money coming in. And when you're looking at esports space as a whole, as an industry, the teams are struggling to profits. There's a lot of teams that are not profitable. There's some teams that are there, but that's difficult for them. So betting is bringing this kind of needed cash for teams to invest and to create the show that actually at the end of the day we're all watching. So I think that's pretty important.
Yeah, pretty much. I can just confirm that exactly. Like if you look at Premier League and at the jerseys of the teams, right? The betting sponsors are there. If you look at the US, what happened after PASPA, pretty much everybody acknowledged that betting can be a major revenue stream. So if we are speaking about legal environment where the bookmakers are regulated, then of course because usually what is betting about, right? What is the concern around betting about? It is about betting of underage, actually loan sharks and all these kind of things. Then responsible gambling. And of course, if you are in safe, regulated environment, all of these concerns to some extent go away because you have a proper licensed regulators. They can accept bets from underage. They need to have a certain safeguard when it comes to responsible gambling. They are not the ones actually loaning in casinos guys some loans that are actually sharky. So all of that is really then going into the more like engaging part that Flavien mentioned. So you have stake in the game. So you are actually more engaged into all of that. You follow the matches much more closely. You are more entertained. So this is additional layer of actually watching that football game, soccer game, Dota 2 game, CSGO game, if you have something at stake. So essentially, if it comes to betting and esports betting, is it similar as any other sports betting? The same stigmas, but at the same time, the same solutions.
Yeah, it does add like another entertainment factor to the esports games. Absolutely, I agree. Moving on, with betting companies increasing their sponsorship investment in esports, does this risk putting off some players that might have a distaste for betting then? Let's start off with you, Marek.
We've touched it to some extent already. If you by default are not all right with betting as a concept, then of course you can find it distasteful. But at the same time, if you look at the esports ecosystem right now, teams are sponsoring and nobody actually forces you to bet, right? And many times what we've seen is that also funny activations. Betway is extremely well known. Rivalry is extremely well known for good activations on their streams, on social channels. So with this being said, they actually, like bookmakers, can actually create additional layer of entertainment, not only because of the odds, like if we speak about figures and the lines that you can bet on, but also around creating additional content for the competitions, for the tournaments, for the teams. So it is. I wouldn't say that betting should, as such, prohibit somebody from doing something. It is more like creating that additional level of engagement. And if somebody finds it distasteful, it's probably similarly as if cigarette companies would sponsor sports, and probably at a similar level of health concerns. We have a couple of energy drinks there anyway. So it will be probably a similar parallel to use.
Yeah, definitely. And when you look at esports, as it's pretty new, the esports fans, are not necessarily exposed to betting that much or educated about betting that much. So I would potentially expect more backlash from the community early on, and progressively with more education and understanding that legal betting and the work around like fair betting and so on and so forth will be more broadcasted. That would be easier, and it will have less and less backlash. So I think it's more linked to the maturity of the markets that you will see more backlash. And at the end of the day, when you look at Betway, as Mike mentioned, they are doing a great work, like a honest and humble work around esports, and the community loves it. Obviously, if you don't like betting, you will never like betting, and you will probably be vocal about not liking betting and having people that bet and so on and so forth. But when you look at sports, it's the same. So I don't think in esports, in the long term, there is more like opposition to betting than there is in sports, for example. In the short term, probably because of the education. One other thing for me that is important is trying to limit the risk. Because if you have a few scandals early on, it's going to take even longer to overcome them and to have a mainstream esports betting. And a few scandals can be match fixing. Huge match fixing scandals can be a big problem. That's why it's important to work day one to structure the ecosystem and to prevent those things from happening. It can also be, as I mentioned a bit earlier, on the stream, the fact that you bet on a stream that is delayed, for a fan, it can be very deceptive if they understand this, and it can either prevent them from betting because they say, okay, the bookmaker knows what happened compared to the stream, but also it can be considered as a scam for the fan. And a lot of regulation actually are working hard on this. So definitely, it's important to double the work on our side as industry stakeholders on making sure there is no those scandals that can have negative impacts in the industry, and being as clean as possible in the space to protect the consumer at the end. That's how you can grow to a mainstream esports betting, I think.
Okay. Just going off what you were saying earlier, Marek, do you believe that the betting and esports industry needs to do more to explain the safety of legal betting while ensuring it keeps its distance from the illegal sector then?
Absolutely, 100%. This is why we work with regulated both platforms and bookmakers. Actually, the similar narrative, we are already licensed in New Jersey as a platform, as a B2B provider, and this is also the commitment for the growth. And actually, last week I was at NAGA conference, which is the conference for the US regulators, and there were literally regulators from Washington, from New Mexico, from New Jersey, from Colorado, Ohio, and all of them are actually interested in a way. We want to learn more about esports, to understand what it is about, or what are the sort of limitations there, what we should focus on to actually allow it, because many times there are a lot of biases that we started with when it comes to esports betting, right? Underage betting, a lot of match fixing, data issues, actually underage players as well, which is a different topic than underage bettors. So all of that, it's about both education of the stakeholders when it comes to regulation, as well as bettors themselves. Because if I'm, betting with unlicensed operator, most probably even if I'm 13, I will be still able to bet. Most probably, if I win largely, I will not probably even receive those funds. They will allow me to bet almost all the time, which is not, of course, in line with what the stakeholders in legal environment want to achieve. So the more we push the entire ecosystem into actually bet with legal books, the more we create the ecosystem where everybody is better protected. And at the same time, if the reaction from regulators is, and I was very open with them, if you are the way that we don't want this here because it creates a lot of issues, actually the more issues are created when you do not legalize that. Because illegal betting on esports is happening. No matter what we think about it, globally, is it happening? You have multiple books in that area. So you as regulator, what can you actually do the best is to allow and create a certain legal framework for legal books to operate in the ecosystem. Otherwise, all of this volume will go somewhere else and the people will be unprotected. Match fixing can happen because nobody cares. And of course, the people underage are not protected and other things that I mentioned already, so I'm not going to replicate that again.
Yeah, really, I concur with what Marek said. I'm French, I live in France, and in France, esports betting is illegal. And I know so many people that are betting on esports on offshore websites. That's definitely a problem, definitely concerns. I think it's also our job as providers, as platforms, to educate, because there is also a new usage. There is crypto betting that has arrived recently. There is skin gambling. There is a lot of new usages that arrives, and it's our job also to educate them, understanding why it's important to be regulated, even if the regulator does not regulate sometimes. So you have to also talk to the regulators, and okay, those new usage needs to be within the regulation, as it's crucial for the overall development of the space. So it's definitely a huge work around education on all parties, from the bettor's perspective, platforms, definitely the regulators, the bookmakers, but also the tournament organizers and so on and so forth. Like it's a full holistic point of view. Because when you're looking at Riot Games, for example, they've been in the past against betting. Any communication around gambling were prohibited. Now they changed a bit the posture, which is great. But this is mandatory that everyone is on board and try to make the space as regulated as possible to protect the consumer at the end.
Just to add on what Flavien said, exactly, like this is not only about one particular stakeholder within the ecosystem, it's about all of them pretty much being involved. Just to give you the sort of example, when it comes to either New Jersey or Colorado, the allowance on esports events is based on the tournament, or it's based on the tournament. So if the regulator actually believes in the integrity that is addressed by the either publisher or tournament organizer, they allow the betting on esports. So by default, all the Riot events are approved. Also, all the ESL events are approved. So the more we speak also to the other tournament organizers to actually not move into those muddy waters on potential match fixing, to have a proper due diligence in place and integrity, code of conduct in place, they can expect that they sort of tournaments will be approved also globally. Again, US is very specific. So actually people will be able to bet on it. More partners will be interested in sponsoring that. So everybody will actually benefit from that. So through to some extent, monetization on the betting side and having a proper guidance and integrity addressed on multiple levels, everybody can benefit, because the assets for ESL, for Riot, for Blast, for the others will eventually grow. The more they will be also betting in the US applicable to that monetization.
So at the end of the day, who do you believe is most responsible to maintain the integrity of esports betting then? Who do you think is really responsible in terms of everything in esports betting?
It has to be everyone. We are all on the same boat. It can't be just one that is pushing. You can't have just ESIC in the middle of everyone not caring. I think there is definitely more responsibilities on the provider point of view, on our work, both Marek and I, because we bring the knowledge to our customers most of the time. We bring the esports expertise, the esports knowledge of the industry and how it works, what is risky, what is perfectly safe to bet on, and so on and so forth. So there's definitely more education to do on our side. But at the end of the day, we can't do everything. Like the right holders, the publishers, they have a big take on this. The regulators have to research and to be receptive to our advices and our expertise as esports experts. So it's a shared effort for sure. I think it starts by the B2B companies that knows the most and that can advise better, I think.
I guess it's a lot about the motivation and the tools that everybody has at its arsenal, right? If you look at publishers and tournament organizers, they basically want their tournaments to be clean. So they definitely do not want to see match fixing because some of them are easily to spot, and it's bizarre that these teams are then still playing around, right? And this is what they are trying to avoid because they really want the fair competition there. At the same time, to identify match fixing on their end is tough, if not even feasible. Because usually, a missed shot, is this intentional or the guy was, shaking because this was the shot that he could take and they will win a major? You don't know. And many times this is where we can step in as the betting part of the ecosystem, pretty much what Sport Data is doing in terms of traditional sports, where you see the tickets, you understand what is happening on the market, you see a very strange behavior, and then you can step in and say, look guys, this is what happened in that particular game. There was a very strange betting activity. This is what we spotted. This is what we are reporting to you. What are we going to do about it, right? And then you have multiple ways how to address it. There is a criminal code that can be applied in a certain jurisdiction, not in all. You, of course, can go to the publishers to potentially ban that person, again, depending on what kind of evidence you have available. So I don't think that publishers can do it themselves. At the same time, we can do it ourselves because the only thing as esports, betting, industry experts, however we call us, we can spot it, but at the same time, we can start the procedure, but at the same time, tournament organizers and publishers will eventually invite those people again to their tournaments. Of course, our motivation is easy. Like, if there is a match fixing, we will lose money, our clients will lose money, and nobody likes that. So is the motivation on our end to report this properly as well? And it's good to somebody in between e-sig civil body that is actually able to continue and chase after those guys with the sufficient evidence to actually make a proper steps. Because many times even our hands are tied. We reported a couple of times to our partners that, look, there was a very strange behavior. We suspect this was match fixing. What do you want to do about it? Should we avoid the bets? Are we going to basically not pay it out? And the reply, depending on the jurisdiction, is different. Sometimes they just say, it's not worth hassle, let's pay it out. In other jurisdictions, they can avoid the bets, and usually nobody comes then because they knew we knew. So there are multiple situations that you need to diligently take into consideration depending on who you are speaking to, what is the jurisdiction, and what is the regulatory framework there. But at the same time, we can be that knowledge bringer and at the same time that information provider to other stakeholders in the industry saying these tournaments, these teams, and actually, if you look at our offering, many times if you do not see a certain tournament or certain team, this is because they are on our blacklist, and we do not want to provide the odds for that. So there are the ways how to get this information, even indirectly from the market, but the best way is that everybody is aligned in terms of fighting against this and providing information and sharing information with each other to actually end it up in a safe environment and clean environment for the competition to happen.
Okay then, so just to finish off, how do you see the future of the intersection between esports and betting? Flavien, if you'd like to start again.
One thing that makes me a bit sad is like esports is a digital and a new entertainment form, but the way you interact with betting is the same as sports. You bet on the same websites or same type of interface, which is surprising. It's not digital native interface and so on. So for me, the future of esports and betting is going to be to push the boundaries of the interface and how you interact with the live and so on and so forth. So in sports right now, you hear quite a bit about micro betting, the fact that you bet on very short events within the game in real time with fast feedback loop. This is something that is being built on esports, and is probably going to be more engaging. When you think about it, that's embedded within the stream. It's much more live and interactive. You just don't bet on a list of 100 markets and you scroll forever to find the right market you want. You're watching the game, something happens, and then boom, you can bet on the next action. And that's more exciting. I think that's kind of the next thing for me, is how betting can put energy and investment on the new interface, a new way to watch and to interact with what's happening with a competitive match. Definitely also metaverse can help on this end, and the way with more immersive environments and more frictionless environment you can bet and watch esports. But all this is definitely down the line.
Esports will just continue to grow. It is here to stay. You have even like verticals that came out recently, like e-simulators, that we can discuss to what extent it is esports. It is, but a bit different to what we are speaking about. So the industry itself started to acknowledge esports a lot. They do understand this is a different narrative, different target group to actually speak to onboard. So esports in general, I guess where we will eventually move, that we will speak about esports as a separate category, but eventually with bookmakers we will have a separate section for CSGO, for Dota 2, for League of Legends. Right now we are putting them all into one basket. So definitely there are a lot of things to happen. There will be more professionalization in esports when it comes to that. The more markets will be opening up. We might be speaking about US, we might be speaking about Asia. Vietnam is opening up for esports. We are already there. When it comes to LATAM, it is also already huge, coming from the gray zone potentially to white zone. So there are a lot of markets opportunities when it comes to the sort of market as such of geos. At the same time, we'll be speaking about more titles, because esports so far has been mostly CSGO, Dota, and League. We'll be speaking about Mobile Legends. We'll be speaking about Free Fire. The access to esports is extremely easy, right? You just need to have either PC, console, right now cell, internet connections, and you are good to go, because many times those games are pretty much for free. So esports is here to stay. It is about to grow, because wherever there is player base, there is basically the viewership base, and there is also the base for betting. So it is not going away. It's just going to more mature. Also from the perspective of integrity, from the perspective of platforms. So yeah, good times ahead.
Thanks so much for your insights, and I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're interested in learning more about the biggest issues in esports, this video is just one piece of a series all about esports, all of which can be found on ice365.com. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much, Jamie.
Thanks for having us.